Well, hey everybody. It's Hank Linderman here on Getting Angry. Thursday, August 13th. And I'm so glad you're here. You know, we call it Getting Angry because all of us have plenty of reason to be getting angry. But it doesn't have anything to do with how we need to behave. We can't behave like damn fools. I think that's the main point. Look who's here. Nancy Weller is here. Cindy Braun-Franklin is here. Bill McNichol is here. And, of course, we want you to share because that's what gets the word around. That's what helps an angel get their wings. John Schott is here. I know John as Larry. We went to high school together. And Larry is quite the artist and a good friend to have. Mary Richardson is here all the way from the wilds of New Jersey. Mary is going to share later. So that's for you, Mary, because I know you're going to do it. So much to talk to you about. First of all, you know that I'm running for Congress in Kentucky's 2nd District. That's the district that runs from Bullitt County, just south of Louisville, on down to Bowling Green, and from Owensboro across to Danville. Let's quickly talk about Owensboro, just in case you don't know. You know, Owensboro is, how do we say this? Owensboro is one of the barbecue capitals of the world. And they do quite a job with barbecue, and they have several really great barbecue places. And one of my dear musician buddies came down. I'm not going to out him because I think he probably works at a place where there's some Republicans, and I don't want to out him. I don't think he'd mind. But anyway, he came down for a visit and brought some barbecue, and it was just a treat to be able to sit out on the porch with my buddy, socially distanced, and eat some Owensboro barbecue. It was quite a wonderful thing. Let's get to these horrible numbers that we need to get to. As we look every day, you know, there are more deaths. We are probably going to cross over to 170,000 people total deaths in the United States. We say it over and over again. A lot of these deaths were unnecessary. In fact, nearly all of them were unnecessary. If we had only done what Germany did, if we had done what South Korea did, if we had done what Australia did. But we didn't, and so here we are. California remains in the number 1 slot, but in terms of deaths, it's still Texas. We're still having trouble getting this virus under control. And I wonder how much of it is, you know, folks who the population just doesn't want to, they don't want to wear masks. And I notice I went out to get some gas this morning. And first of all, one of the nearby gas stations was shut down, which is, you know, one of the side effects, I guess, from small businesses shutting down. And then the next one was having trouble with the pump, so I had to drive significantly further. And that's definitely one way that rural America gets affected. As small businesses shut down, it's not like we're overrun with small businesses. We then just have to drive further, and it makes it just a little tougher. You know, we get the benefit of living out in this beautiful area, but we're going to see a lot of businesses just not come back after this virus. So it's a very, very serious thing. Let's move on to the big story I want to talk about, which is about the post office. And I'm talking about, oh my goodness, Jim Porter made a great comment that I'll get back to here in a second. The post office has become politicized. And one of President Trump's friends has been put in charge of the post office. And one of the first things this person did was to eliminate overtime. So postal workers are only allowed to work their 40 hours or whatever, and they may not work over that time. And that means if the mail gets slowed down, that's fine. I think we all know the reason for that is because the Republicans and President Trump in particular understand that if they allow everyone to vote, they're not going to be able to hold on to office. So they're deactivating these machines that automatically sort mail. And obviously that's a problem. Now, the Postal Service is removing these sorting machines from facilities around the country without any official explanation or reason given. In many cases, these are the same machines that would be tasked with sorting ballots, calling into question the promises made by new Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy that the Postal Service has ample capacity to handle the predicted surge of mail-in ballots. And, the union officials don't really know what's going on either. They don't really know. They're not being told why these machines are being removed. Now, of course, there's some excuses that machines do get moved from time to time. Oh, Hildegard Pyle is here. Please share. Glad to see you. And this is Jim Porter is commenting, and I can't see who's replying to him. Trump and the Republican Party fear vote by mail because polls have shown that a disproportionate number of those who prefer it are Joe Biden supporters. Actually, I've also seen information that Republicans actually like mail-in voting. And of course, President Trump voted by mail multiple times. So, it's a little bit of a canard, I guess. Now, the Postal Workers Union president, Kimberly Carroll, says, we're not sure you're going to be able to figure out why these machines are being removed. We haven't figured it out either. And they're giving the example of, look at it this way, your local grocery store has to cut a third of its cash out lines, but the management expects the same productivity, quality, and speed. So it's just not going to happen is the concept there. While the consequences are unclear for now, it fits with the sudden, opaque, and drastic changes made by DeJoy, a longtime Republican fundraiser and Trump donor. In less than 2 months since he's been Postmaster General, he's curtailed overtime, and he's reorganized the entire Postal Service, and he's moving people around that are critical people. And I think there's some other details that come out of this. They often are having to sort the mail by hand, which is fine. But it sounds like the prediction here is this is only really going to be a problem if you wait until the last minute to send back your ballot. I spoke with a voter yesterday in Davis County in Owensboro, a pair of voters, a husband and wife, and they said they will be dropping their vote off directly to the courthouse. So I suppose that is also an option as well. But this guy's trying to steal the election. I can't imagine if President Hillary Clinton had said, you know what, let's make it so that Republicans can't vote. Let's do whatever we can. Can you imagine the screaming? So they're saying that if more, this is from Mary Richardson. Mary says, if more than 50% of us vote by mail, the prediction is it would take up to 3 months to get final results. Nina Morberry is here. Glad you're here, Nina. And so is Barbara. And you all need to share, of course. Let's see where we are on the, I'm going to look at it where we are on the big board. We have a guest today, of course, and I'm getting ready to call him. Let's see if I've got his picture ready to go. Yes, Dr. Gregg is going to join us, and there he is. Let's call him on the phone and see if he picks up. And he's going to talk with us about, he's going to talk to us about testing. And I'm going to warn you ahead of time. This is a complicated issue. This is not going to be easy. But here we go. Let's see if we can get Dr. Gregg on the line.
Gregg Adams, Dr. Adams, ask Dr. Gregg.
We had to play your theme song first. Are you there, Gregg?
Good. I'm here.
And by the way, I hear your family is interested. They want to know when the T-shirt is coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. They said if you're going to have a theme song, you need a T-shirt.
If we have any graphic artists in the audience, Dr. Gregg's mom and the rest of his family are interested in a T-shirt design, and I think we should get that together. So I'm going to put up a slide that you sent to me last night, and it's from something called Microbe Notes. And I got to warn you, Dr. Gregg, we've talked about this a little bit. This is daunting material, but it looks like there are a couple of concepts that if we can wrap our heads around it, that we'll be a couple of steps ahead in understanding the things you're going to talk about.
Sure. Let me see if I can pull up. I haven't had your images available. There we go. Now I have your images available. Okay.
Right. So I'm looking at the first screen that says microbe notes, and it's kind of the opening screen. But the next screen I'm showing is what is sensitivity? And I read this about 6 times last night. Actually, I can't say I read it straight through 6 times. I read each sentence 6 times before I could move on to the next sentence because I'm a musician. I'm not used to this. So go ahead.
This is a very, very tough topic, and I think it's confusing even for people who deal with these numbers every day. When we think about a test, and we're talking about tests for COVID-19 or for the coronavirus, you have to remember that the only reason to do the test is to then make a decision with the results of that test. Simply having the test results doesn't help unless you're going to use it to make a therapeutic decision or to make recommendations to a patient. So, for example, if you get a coronavirus test and it's positive, but you're not very ill, you're going to get a recommendation to go home and quarantine. And they may ask you who you know you have been in contact with in the last 4 to 7 days. If you are tested for another disease and there's an adequate therapy, they'll give you that therapy. They'll give you that medication that will take care of that disease. We have a series of tests now that are available for either the virus itself or the antibodies, and we don't yet know what to do with it because the tests have specific sensitivities and specificities, and it depends on when you use them. Let me explain. If you wanted to find out how many people went to the zoo today, you have a couple of ways you could do that. One is to count the number of legs at the zoo and divide by 2.
That joke jumped into my head, and I thought, oh, that would be so funny, and you went right there. Fantastic.
And the problem is that with the number of legs that you have includes the 4 on the rhinoceros, the 4 on the giraffe, and the 0 on the slug.
Right.
So you need to, and so that's a test that is very sensitive but not very specific. It chooses everything that has legs but doesn't throw out the ones that are not human. Or you could do a test where you say, let's count the number of people who came through the turnstile in the front. And that's very specific for human beings, but it ignores the fact that there are other doors that you can come through. And it ignores the fact that there are employees and people who got in other ways. So that's a test that's very specific, but it misses some of the positives, some of the humans that were at the zoo. And so each test that we do for any disease has the possibility of missing diseases that are there that the test didn't pick up. And those are called false negatives. Or it picks up things that are part of the disease that aren't really, they pick up people who don't have the disease but are falsely positive. Every test has these 2 measurements. And so trying to find a test that maximizes both sensitivity and specificity is the holy grail, but we don't have any test that is 100% sensitive and 100% specific.
Are you saying that about just this disease or just generally about testing for any disease?
Generally about testing for any disease.
Wow.
When we go into a hospital and we look at someone who's had a blood test, and some of those tests come in panels. So someone may take your blood and they can say, I've measured your sodium, your potassium, your chloride, all of the chemistries in your blood, 20 different tests. On average, 1 out of 20 of those numbers is wrong. And we have to figure out whether or not it makes sense to retest or find another way to measure that number that's wrong. I don't know which one's wrong, though. I have to compare what is going on with the patient. So
that means that when you find a certain amount that show up as false, so back to sensitivity, because sensitivity, my understanding is, and I'm going to go forward to another slide. Let's see if I can find it. Sensitivity helps to rule a disease out. Is that correct?
Yeah, so sensitivity is, when you think about sensitivity, you want to rule, if it's positive, you have found someone who has the disease. It can help find positive diseases. When you think about specificity, you want to find negative diseases where you can rule out a disease.
So that rules out, if a test that's high specificity, it's easy for me to say, that will identify people who simply don't have the disease, right?
Right. Specificity is what you do to try and figure out exactly who has the disease or who doesn't have the disease. The issue really with the sensitivity and specificity is that it belongs to the test. It doesn't matter who you're testing. That doesn't really necessarily change because the test has a sensitivity and a specificity. The real problem comes when you use a test on a population of people, because how valuable that test is depends on whether or not there's a lot of disease in the population you're testing or a little bit of disease in the population you're testing. So you can take, and when we screen the general population, many of whom don't have symptoms, the fact that when you find someone who's positive, you can be pretty sure that they're positive. But we're going to miss all the false negatives, and that's the problem with screening populations, because the false negatives are the ones who have the virus and are able to spread it without thinking that they actually have the virus. We're very good at screening people who have symptoms because the false negative rate is much lower in that scenario.
And you have some idea, someone with symptoms, that's a great way to initially decide whether you should have a test or not, is do you have symptoms or do you not?
Right. And every test that we do, we use the common sense that we have as physicians. Some of us have more than others. And we have to put what we see in front of us in terms of symptoms and signs in the patient, and then the information that goes along with the test that we're given. It's not a situation where we go, oh, by golly, you have a positive test, and even though you have no symptoms, you must have the disease. We're very leery of that. The problem with coronavirus is there are a bunch of asymptomatic carriers that are lurking around. So we have to assume that everyone's carrying it. The test is not that helpful is the problem. And now the problem with the way that people think about these tests is that things like universities are saying you can start only if you have a negative coronavirus test, or a hospital can measure my temperature each day and say you can come in and work because you have a normal temperature. And that's a good screening test. It's very sensitive, but it's not very specific.
I was going to say someone could show up without a fever but be incubating the virus.
Right, and that would be a false negative. And
Right.
if I walk in and I have a fever because I have strep throat, that's a false positive. I get sent home.
I'm just blown away. And then there's the issue of how skilled is the person administering the test?
Yes, that because nothing that's hard is easy, and it gets harder because the sensitivity and the specificity is defined by the person who makes the test. It's usually a high estimate of how good the test is, and then you have to rely on someone to do the swab. Did they get far enough back? Did they leave it in long enough? You have to rely on them to adequately transport that swab to the laboratory. You have to rely on another individual to adequately culture that swab and run the test. The test is a complicated test. And so all of those sorts of errors get compounded into making more false positives and more false negatives.
And each one of them multiplies the difficulty, I would think.
Correct.
And let's not forget there are probably multiple manufacturers of the same test. Is that possible?
That's true. There are about 3 different manufacturers of the types of machines that do the reverse transcriptase PCR. The ones that are looking for antibodies, there's probably 30 different tests that are available, each of which has a different sensitivity and specificity.
Now, these are the tests that you just mentioned, the swab, and I had someone describe it to me. They said it felt like the back of their head was getting itched from the inside, getting scratched from the inside. That swab goes pretty far back in there, doesn't it?
It does. When I describe it to my patients, I say it's going to be like a brain biopsy.
Doesn't sound pleasant. Have you endured one of these?
I've endured about 5 of those. I get tested every couple of weeks.
Okay. Now, how long does it take for that test to come back?
When they do that test, they have a way of doing it within an hour. And it just has to do with the fact that my test, if they needed to know it in an hour, they will put that in front of all of the other tests.
Because you're a healthcare provider and you're on the front line, so.
Well, and my particular test came back in 72 hours because they knew that I had other ways of diagnosing that in myself. And so now that I've been negative and I don't have any symptoms, they can put me on the back lines. But if I have a patient in the emergency department and I have to figure out whether or not I put them into an isolation room or if I can put them on a general population ward, I want that decision made within an hour. And so they're the ones who actually go in first. And if you are part of the long lineup of cars in a public health center where people are swabbing everyone who comes through as part of the county testing capabilities, those will take up to 2 weeks to get back because they go to the back of the line because that's an asymptomatic population of people.
Now, there's another kind of test because I clicked on a link in the first thing you sent me to, and looks to be a blood test rather than a swab test.
And that blood test is looking for the presence of antibodies to the virus. Antibodies are something that your body develops against the virus when it has had exposure to the virus. In this case, you would have to be exposed to the coronavirus by having the disease. In other situations, we actually use vaccines to develop these antibodies, which is the basis for the mumps vaccination and the polio vaccination, is to develop those antibodies so that when you experience that virus, you're already ready to fight it. When you look for those antibodies for coronavirus, you have to have had the disease. And it takes between 3 and 6 weeks for those antibodies to show up in the blood. So if you said, gosh, last week I felt horrible, let's see if I have antibodies, they're not going to be present in your blood yet, even if you had the coronavirus.
And I noticed that there were 2 types of antibodies, that one was the early defenders who showed up with an infection, and then there were the ones who were the later arriving troops. Is that
correct?
Fair to say?
And that is fair to say. We make a wave of different types of antibodies with every type of viral infection. And you can tell we use those to find out exactly how recently you had the disease. If you have only the late responders, because the late responders are the ones that stick around for a long time, then you had the disease a while ago. If you have only early, then you're in the middle of the disease now. If you have a combination of both, then you're recovering very recently from the disease.
Well, that is fascinating. So now I guess this leads back to what can we tell people what do we do? What do normal citizens do? If we're asymptomatic and, we're doing all the things we think we should be doing. We are socially distancing. We're wearing masks. We're trying to stay away from people that aren't wearing masks. And but we've shut down a lot of our lives. How long? Go ahead. You have brought up the real question, which is that because people are nervous about asymptomatic spread of the disease, and rightfully so, a university may say you don't get to start your freshman year class unless you have a negative test. I think that is a good knee-jerk response, but I think it's misplaced because testing someone once before they enter the freshman year class ignores the fact that tomorrow they're going to get frozen yogurt with their friends, and then Thursday their best friend from high school is going to come and visit them, and they are going to have exposure after exposure after exposure to people that potentially have the virus. That one test protects that university for one day, and that's it. So I don't think that that's the way to do it necessarily, but we're still trying to figure out how to approach this and keep people safe. For now,
wear your masks, socially distance, wash your hands, make sure that people who are really at risk, the very young, the very old, the people who have immunodeficiencies, are spending as little time in the presence of other unsafe people as they can.
Well, that's back to basics. I keep wishing that there would be a change in policy, that we would do what we call go Godzilla on the virus and shut things down and basically starve the virus by limiting interactions with people. But I guess I'm wondering if the United States, if citizens will be willing to do it. We're seeing the motorcycle rally that's going on in Sturgis right now. I guess they're saying as many as 250,000 people getting together and obviously not socially distancing. And they're going to then disperse back to the rest of the country. And it's going to be a very interesting several weeks after that event.
Right. And we as human beings want to be social, and we want to be getting together, and we miss the things that we used to have. I think that we'll be able to get back there, but it will only come with either an adequate vaccine or with herd immunity, where enough people have had the disease that it now the virus can't find enough adequate hosts to sort of plant into. Herd immunity with this particular virus means that we have potentially killed off 60 million people in this country, which I don't think is a very good payoff.
That seems like a horrible, horrible thing to allow to happen. Yeah. Wow. Well, this is a dose of cold water a bit, but it certainly encourages me to stay the course and wear my mask when I go to the grocery store, when I go to get gas, and keep my distance from everybody. And I guess that's the best thing to go forward. And Dr. Gregg, I hope you can come back and see us next Thursday. I'm not sure what we'll talk about. I see there are a lot of questions. And I don't know that I have to confess to everybody, while your questions were coming in, I was having to stay laser focused on Dr. Gregg because I was really taken to the edge with my understanding of this. So, Dr. Gregg, thank you for your patience and your time with us. We really, really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I love doing this. And as always, I'll go through the questions if you put them in the comments, and I'll try to answer them tonight or tomorrow. Stay healthy. Wash your hands. Be kind to each other, because America has not been very kind to each other recently.
Yes, I think being kind to each other that's why we wear the mask. That's why we stay distant. Dr. Gregg, thank you so much. I'm going to start the goodbye music. Thank you all for being here. This is another great episode with Dr. Gregg. We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate him, and I appreciate all of you. Remember, when you're getting angry, use it to get your determination built up to do the right thing. Be ready to vote this November. Do whatever you can to do the right thing for our country. Thank you all for being here.